How to simulate test day, aka the most common LSAT test center problems and how to avoid them. The biggest thing you want to do is prepare for worst case scenarios. I heard from one student in Cairo who wrote to me the following. I took the LSAT here in June. A woman randomly walked into the room while the exam was being administered and just started chatting with the proctor. They were whispering, but it was still audible and very distracting. Also, the electricity in the building went off for around the length of a section, so we resumed taking the exam in the dark with no AC, in Cairo, in June. Needless to say, I canceled my score on the spot. Wow. Imagine if that was your test day experience. Of course, electricity could go out anywhere, and the best you could hope for would be a free retake a few months later with the original test removed from your record entirely. However, there's a very good chance that LSAC might give you nothing at all for your trouble. While there is this element of chance involved, there's a lot you could do to minimize the impact of unexpected test day disasters. As a cautious test taker, you want to prepare for the worst. Rooms do often have little quirks of their own. You might hear noises in some when the heating turns on or off. Just think about all the noises that boilers and pipes make, like hissing. And there's no guarantee you'll get extra time just because there was some sort of disruption. And summertime test takers don't really have an advantage either, because the room might be over air conditioned and feel like a walk-in refrigerator. Other rooms might have no AC at all. And unfortunately, an uncomfortable room is not the only obstacle you might face. I'll cover how to face those more later, but you might also just have difficulty adjusting to actual test day conditions with strict timing, in contrast to however you're doing things at home. So in order to avoid a test day drop, you need to simulate test day conditions similar to those you will be experiencing on test day. Do this as much as you can, because you want to make your actual exam nothing more than just another practice test. Another one in a long line of exams that you've already taken. A big part of that will be strictly timing yourself, not taking a break in the middle of a section to go get a drink or go to the bathroom and pause the clock while you do that. If you want to do that, the clock's going to be running, or you can wait until the break. As we discussed previously, you want to make sure you're doing 5-section exams, not 4. Because on test day, you will experience that experimental section, and you don't want to do only 4 sections on your practice tests, and then say on test day, geez, I was so tired by that last section. You have to be practicing under those realistic conditions. Otherwise, your scores could be falsely inflated when you're getting these super high practice scores, and then you see that drop on test day. So some ways you can simulate test day and take those practice exams under realistic actual LSAT conditions. Practice on a small desk. I have heard stories, some horror stories, about test takers having really tiny desks where they can't even lay out the full 2 pages of the booklet at once. They can't fit their bubble sheet at the same time. So you definitely want to be ready for that limited space if it happens to you. You also want to bring layers in case the room is too hot or too cold. You want to practice in rooms where the temperature is slightly uncomfortable, like I was saying earlier with the AC or the furnace. All of those environmental factors are out of your control, and I assure you, they are not as likely as your home or your study center to be as comfortable. So be on the lookout for that. Be aware of that possibility. If you can, do a few exams at your actual test center. This obviously isn't possible for everyone. It's based on how close it is to your house and how amenable they are to letting you enter. Some places have stricter security than others. Some universities you can walk right in, others you can't. So give it a shot, talk to people, see what you can do. And of course, do at least 1 or 2 practice exams with distractions. So that could be with other people in the background. It could be at a coffee shop or a library. It could be using one of those test day simulation MP3s or YouTube videos. Just search out there LSAT Proctor and you'll find several that include distractions. Really useful to do. And you also want to make sure that you are using a bubble sheet, that you are taking the time to use this bubble sheet as you do practice tests, because it takes time to bubble, it takes time to erase, it takes time to fill those in. And if you're not used to that and you're just at the 35-minute mark with the bubble sheet, you're going to be over the 35-minute mark. So be aware that you will need to use this and start using it now. Don't underestimate it. You can print out bubble sheets online, you can photocopy them. Make sure that you're getting practice like you will have to practice on the actual thing. So aside from timing with the bubble sheet, you also want to practice ideally with less than 35 minutes per section, a shorter break, or no reminder of the 5-minute warning. Because on test day, the timing might not be perfect, it might not be ideal, and you also want to have a buffer if you can get it. So one trick you can use, going back to the bubble sheet for a minute, is to make a little tiny line on your answer sheet under the number where your section is complete. So let's say your game section has 23 questions. You can make a little tiny line below number 23 on that bubble sheet. And that will help you avoid misbubbling or second guessing yourself as to whether you made some kind of small error. And you also want to start tying up loose ends when you're down to that 5-minute warning. In case they don't give you a 5-minute warning, you have already bubbled for yourself and you don't need to worry about potentially missing out on that. Reports from students indicate that LSAC generally does nothing for people who are shorted on time or not given a 5-minute warning. Of course, most people don't experience this problem, but if it happens to you, it'll be a big deal. Noise. One student wrote to me, there was a loud bing every 2 minutes throughout the entire test. I ended up canceling my scores. So yes, who knows why that bing was happening? It could have been a Proctor's cell phone, could have been some air cooling unit inside the test room. It could have been something from next door. But you can experience noise. It's not going to necessarily be a library-like setting. The proctors might make noise, other test takers might make noise, the room might make noise, or you could have external noise. Some people have seriously reported a marching band practicing outside their test center. If you Google it, you'll see what I'm talking about. I'm not making this stuff up, people. It's real. It happens. Maybe more likely at a college in the suburbs or a rural area than in the city. But in the city, of course, you have plenty of noises as well. I know, I live in a city. I hear it all the time. So do your practice tests in noisy environments, like I mentioned. And in the winter months, be prepared for the possibility that you or others might be sick, might be blowing your nose, you might want to bring cough drops or tissues for yourself and others if you're taking it in the winter. So, or an allergy season maybe. This might not be enough, but at least it's something. You can't always prevent any issue from occurring, but you can do what you can to mitigate the impact they have on you. And that comes from being aware of these beforehand, as well as mindfulness or other forms of meditation that I talked about previously. And of course, motion is a potential issue. One student wrote to me, the person next to me was periodically shaking the table. I had to get the attention of the proctor who saw it and went over to her to request that she stop shaking her body against the table. So yeah, that's a thing. It happens. Aside from the other test takers walking or moving around or shaking, they might be flipping pages. They might be erasing vigorously. The proctors might be walking around or hovering around you. This means really that you've just got to take the LSAT in places you would expect to be much worse than your test center. That's ultimately the bottom line with everything I'm talking about here. Prepare for the worst, simulate distractions, whatever your worst nightmare is, do that to yourself before the exam so that if it happens on the exam, it won't be the first time you experienced it. Another thing to be aware of is pacing. You want to take several exams with strict timing. You want to use the bubble sheet, use the analog watch, rotate the experimental section, and not worry when you're timing yourself what other test takers are doing. Other test takers might have a different section than you do at the same time. So let's say your experimental is first, theirs could be third. You might have games, they might have reading comp. So those psychological things where like that person is going faster than I am, or I'm erasing more than other people are, that's a bad sign. You don't necessarily know what's going on for other students, and maybe they're not erasing when they should be erasing, or maybe they're going too quickly when they should be slowing down a bit. They might have completely different pacing strategies than you do. So if you feel like you're falling behind, that you better skip and move on just because other people are going at a different pace, ignore them. Stay focused on your pacing strategy and remain confident in your techniques. You could also try doing a practice exam with a friend or another student if you are in a study group. This will help you get used to being around other people who write or turn pages faster or slower than you do. You could have a friend proctor an exam for you, so you get used to actually having another human being keep time for you. To summarize, you want to simulate distractions, small desk, room being too hot or too cold, other people making noise or moving around, cell phones potentially ringing or beeping, even though, of course, they should not be. Try to have everything be as similar to your actual official test day experience as possible. So overall, for your average exam, you want to do 35-minute sections if you're testing without accommodations. You want to give yourself a 5-minute warning. You want to give yourself a break. You want to practice with the experimental. These are all the norm, of course. If you are simulating a worst case scenario, you want to maybe remove some of these benefits or features. So that's pretty much it on test day simulation. Going forward, we'll be talking a bit more about how to deal with the proctors and LSAT.